we've talked about if statements, uh, compound, well, not compound yet, but we talked about if statements, we've talked about if else, else if, we've talked about switch case, uh, and we basically dealt with your basic decisions. Uh, Now, we've dealt with decisions on integers and doubles and booleans. Strings, however, we have not. So we're going to cover a little bit of strings. So if you want to go ahead and make a new project, hopefully by now you should know how to do this, I'm assuming. So, whatever the date is, put that there. Then I'm just going to call mine string ifs and make sure the location is there, saved. Now, when we're dealing with strings, we have to approach them a little differently than if we were dealing with integers. If I have an integer, let's say, I have int number equals 1, right? And then I have string word equals 1. Well, we'll just actually keep it the same, 1. All right, so if I make an if statement, if number equals 1, that will compare, is this variable 1? And in this case, it is. Now, if I want to use a string, however, if I can't really do if word equals 1. Well, one thing, one's an integer, one's a string. It won't let you do that. Now, if I put that in quotes, it's going to give you a yellow line now instead, saying comparing strings using the equals or not equals. Now, when you're comparing strings, this will work sometimes, but not always. There are actually quite a lot of times where you would write this and it wouldn't know whether the answer is 1 or not. Depends on how the program's written. Now, if you want this to work every time, what we have to do is instead of using the equals, so forget about that. Don't use equals or not equals for strings. This is only for if statements, but I can say word dot equals 1. Yeah, yes, it is. And you see it prints it, right? So dot equals is what we'd use instead of the equals sign. So this is the same as basically saying, if word is equal to 1. Same thing. Now, the nice thing about this, though, is you don't necessarily have to just stick with just the equals. Let's say if word, and you notice there's a lot of stuff that pops up. Uh, so I can say 2 lowercase dot equals, in this case, 1. Well, let's just make another one. I'll say Bob, just so we have something different here. I'm going to come up here and say string word, rara, word 1 equals Bob. Now, I believe it is an if. Now, in this case, it's not Bob. Bob is capitalized. Bob is not, right? So it doesn't say I believe it is. Now, let me just see what I did. Oh, I need to change this to word 1. That probably affected it. There we go. So what if I take this off? Let's just cut that out real quick for a second. Boop. There we go. So I run this, and it's going to fail because Lowercase bob is not the same as uppercase bob. They're completely different. Now, if I add in this dot to lowercase, watch what happens. What this to lowercase does, or to uppercase, is it converts this to lowercase. So it would drop those to lower b, lower o, lower b. So it would match. So you could actually, ignore case. Let's say you were asking somebody to type in something, but you didn't care if it was uppercase or lowercase. You could use this to basically ignore that completely. Let them come in and, if they want to put in all capital letters because their caps lock is on, it doesn't matter. It'll ignore the cap and just make it lowercase. So that's one of the nice things you can actually do with the strings. Now, with ifs, it works just like this. Dot equals, if you wanted to lowercase it, dot to lowercase. With switch case, though, switch, we'll just say word1. And it helps if I do this right. Hang on a second here. Back that up some. There we go. Switch. There we go. Word1. Now what I'm doing with strings here, instead of my case being 1, my case could be, John. John. Break. Case. Bob. Bob. Default. Oh no, they killed Kenny. And I don't really have to have a break there, but put that in there. Now again, if I take out the breaks, and John does happen to be the one that's chosen, it's going to do John, Bob, and, oh no, they killed Kenny. It'll do all of them. So the break is just there to stop it from continuing if we go to one of these. You don't have to have a break there, but I usually put it there just because, it matches. But I mean, it's the end anyway, so it doesn't particularly matter. In switch, this will of course print. Oh no, they killed Kenny because I did not lowercase anything. I send say word dot to lowercase up here and get the same effect though, and you'll see Bob. So that's possible, depending on how you want to write it. Now the nice thing about the switch case is you don't have to do anything different. You don't have to use this dot equals, or you don't even have to use dot to lowercase if you don't want to. You just write case and put the quotes in case, and it would be the same as if this was an integer. You would put 1. Of course, it's going to break right now, but because it's not a integer, it's a string. But basically the same way you write it before is how you write it now. So if we have intro switches, you write it the exact same way. Case 0, 1, 2, 3. I've gone over too far. String ifs. There we go. Case John, Bob, Jane, whatever. So switch cases are actually, I would say, easier to use, particularly if you're using strings, because you don't have to change how you do anything. You just switch case, and it's written the exact same way. If statements are a little more difficult because you have to remember to add that dot equals instead of equals equals. But that's the only thing you really have to change. And the reason you have to do this, for those who just want to know, a string is considered an object. It's not considered a primitive, like a number 1, 2, 3. You can easily look at that and see what it is. A string is actually an array of characters. So a character is 1 letter. And then an array would be a whole list of them. So it's actually a lot more complicated than just, a single letter or a single number. Which is why we can do the dot to lowercase and these other things on it. Since it's so much more complicated, they've built in a whole bunch of functions into it. If you just try to say, does this equal that? It Java can get confused in that case. Other languages implicitly do the comparison like they're supposed to. Java doesn't. You have to use the dot equals for it. Now, if you use equals equals, it may work. It just depends on how things are written and how things are done. But there are a lot of cases where it won't. If you use the dot equals, though, it will work every time, pretty much, as you see here. All right, well, that is switch case with strings. Uh, Now, again, if you're writing a program, you want to use ifs or you want to use switch cases, well, I say ifs and switch cases with strings. You can use either or. It doesn't really matter. The thing about the switch case here is it's a lot prettier. It's a lot, I would say, more organized when I look at it. It's easy to see how it's kind of laid out. An if statement is far more common in all programming languages. Uh, Now, a switch case statement is also vastly more efficient. If it's Bob, it's going to ignore every case and go directly to Bob. If we have if statements, it's going to go down every single one until it finds the one that it's looking for, that matches. So speed-wise, an if statement is significantly slower. Now, for this class, and most of the time, you won't even notice. I mean, we're talking fractions of a millisecond. But if you were doing something major in a large program or something like that, you would certainly notice the difference. Yeah, especially if you have to do a particular operation where you're going through hundreds of ifs, you know, every second or something like that. Every time you do a certain thing, you have to go through all these ifs. A switch case would be more efficient. You would notice the difference, particularly if you stack on all types of other code that are doing things at the same time. All right, well, that is dealing with string ifs. Hopefully that enlightens you a little bit. And of course, we could do else if, else if, else. It would just be word1 dot equals 2, word1 dot equals 3. I shortened this a little bit to make sure you got the gist of it, but I guess if you want to do a little bit more, go ahead and do this again and write it for else if word dot equals 2, word dot equals 3 in quotes. Add in a couple more, instead of Bob, John, else, write out the full thing. Write out a couple more portions of this for a little more practice. We can also come down here with our switch case and change that up a little bit if you wanted to. Now, if you switch case, I should mention this. If this is going to be a string, then all these have to be strings. If this is going to be an int, then all these have to be ints. There are some things you could do to convert things, but there are always ways to do things. But typically, if I make this a string, then all these cases are going to be strings. I could do some back flips and conversions and stuff to change things if I really, really wanted to, but honestly, you'd be giving yourself more work than necessary. It just depends on the program, though. All right, well, if you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask. And again, whenever I mention, you should try this, add this, do it. The more practice you get at coding, the better you get at it. If you just do the bare minimum, what I'm showing, then you'll know the bare minimum. If you want to be better than the bare minimum, then, do some more work. Go on YouTube, find some videos of somebody else talking. Maybe they sound better than me. Maybe. I don't know if that's possible, but perhaps. Uh, Go, Google some tutorials or something like that. If you want some programs or something that you can build, I'll be happy to post a few. Usually, sometimes I do. Here's a practice program. Why don't you try putting this together? The more you practice, the better you get at programming, especially. If you just watch a video and don't bother writing any of it down, don't bother expounding and changing and learning the little minor details, then you'll find yourself really hurting when the programs get a little bit more complicated. All right, well, that is all for today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.